Welcome back. Within a week of Fairfax's announced changes, News Limited announced its own restructure. News talked of new opportunities to continue to embrace its newspapers, but to push harder into broadcast and online arenas. But make no mistake, despite much healthier profits and revenue from print newspapers, the large newspaper companies admit they have no choice but to embrace the digital world with gusto. I spoke to Group Editorial Director at News Limited, Campbell Reid, a little earlier. Campbell Reid, welcome to Late Agenda.
Pleasure to be here.
What's the strategy behind your restructuring? Why do it?
We have to do it because we're in the middle of one of the greatest communication revolutions in human history, and it's fundamentally changing the way people around the world are consuming information. And we're in the information business, and the market, consumers, are sending us an incredibly strong signal that their world's changing, we need to change too.
So are you saying this is really a last-ditch, desperate effort to find a future for yourselves?
Depends which way you look at it.
Well, in newspapers.
Right. So if we fix ourselves in the notion that we're in the newspaper business, things are terribly desperate. If we fix ourselves in the notion that we're in the journalism business, things have never been more exciting. And that's just, there's two sides of the street. And the fact of the matter is people are consuming information whenever they want it, on whatever device they want. In our mind, one of those devices is a printed newspaper, and for us they're massively successful and massively strong, and we're committed to them. That doesn't mean to say we're not committed to digital information, because people are adding those devices to their world with massive enthusiasm. We believe there is a really strong future for information that helps people live their lives, and it's a commercial business proposition.
You're moving from something like 19 divisions to just 5 divisions. What's the thinking behind that? Is it just to save costs?
It's something that News historically should have done a long time ago, probably. News Limited is not a company set up across Australia in one go. It's acquisitions of newspaper companies over time. What we have done in the past is kept all of those divisions, whether they be in Townsville or Cairns or Brisbane, as separate entities. So when we say we are reducing those number of divisions, we're not actually reducing the number of products we put out or operations we run, but we're bringing them into sense. So basically, Queensland, out of Brisbane, runs Queensland, as opposed to having satellite divisions scattered around in the smaller centres. So that's really News restructuring itself to make sense of its scale more than anything.
So are you really saying you were forced to do this restructuring due to the pace at which consumers are moving to and embracing the online world?
I would love to say that as an industry we leapt into this with great gusto, but newspaper industry globally has moved, I don't know whether we've been forced to it, but we've moved way too slowly to embrace it.
Can you give us an idea of how quickly are consumers moving to online readership?
They're moving with incredible speed to consuming news online, and in the process of doing that, they're redefining where is a news channel. For so many people, Twitter is a news channel, YouTube is a news channel. The iPad is the fastest selling consumer device in human history. So how fast are they going there? They're going there at light speed.
News does seem to be embracing more television and online at the expense of your newspapers, because presumably that's where you see the future lies. I think
anybody who pretends they have a crystal ball about what will happen to printed newspapers is having themselves on. And we've been having people plucking predictions out of the sky that at a certain point in time printed newspapers will no longer be with us. Maybe they're right. I happen to believe that they're not right, because if you completely...
So you think the newspapers will not be dead
think so.
10 years' time?
I don't think so. I think disruptive technology throughout human history, almost always the old technology doesn't die. It massively changes and evolves and emerges through the revolution as something completely altered in its fundamental shape and business and what it does. doesn't necessarily, we're not in the business of throwing our hands up in the air and saying, well, newspapers in printed form are not dead, because I challenge people to say, how much fun is it to sit down with a Sunday newspaper and read it? How much fun is it to sit down with a book and read it, even in the age of e-readers and so forth? So to declare the end of printed newspapers is extreme delusional defeatism, in my view.
But having said that, you are drastically changing your business away from newspapers.
No, we're not. We are not making a choice between newspapers and digital. We are embracing both because our consumers are embracing both. And so for other newspaper companies to appear to be ready to dig the pit to put their newspapers into, we don't share that. We see a future where people will be consuming information on whatever channel they like, including printed newspapers. Now, that doesn't mean to say we're dinosaurs and we've got our head in the sand, but you look at our own lives or any consumer's lives, they are so rich with choice. Why wouldn't we be in all of those choices rather than compartmentalising ourselves into one or the other? Because consumers are not doing that.
Can you still guarantee quality journalism and the investment in that if you are looking to cut costs?
I think what you have to understand with that choice you're making, again, you go to the question, what business are you in? You're in the business of quality information. And that quality, in my mind, is to have the best racing journalists and TV journalists along with the best political journalists. So it's people with expertise and insight and investigative abilities. They are the future of our business. That's what people say is quality journalism. In the back end of our business, in terms of the production line of printed products, the production line indeed of online, and our scale as news across the country, we can collaborate and get much more streamlined in a lot of areas before we start saying, oh, well, our best journalists have to leave the company. That we will fight forever to keep the best journalists in the company.
Can you just explain the business model a bit more? Because if the bulk of your profits and your revenue are still coming from newspapers, why the move to so embrace digital?
Well, it's been talked about for a long time, and it's true. You have to be prepared to cannibalise yourself, because if you don't, somebody else will. And that's happened to classified advertising revenue globally.
So that's what you are doing. You are cannibalising yourself to a degree.
You have to be prepared to do that, absolutely. So if you look at career advertising and real estate advertising, newspaper companies that have successfully gone to build businesses online in that space have done it without the mindset that as part of that equation they have to protect their newspaper revenue. And you have to be brutal about that. If you make compromised choices in any sphere of life, its compromise is not as good as a pure choice. So yes, you have to be prepared to do that.
So let's just get this straight. Your newspapers still make the bulk of your profits and revenue in this country.
Correct.
And your digital makes, what, nothing? Or a very small amount of money?
It depends how you break it up. If you include, obviously, realestate.com, which News is a major shareholder in, then our digital business, like the Fairfax digital business, makes good money. Where the newspaper industry globally has struggled is to make good money out of the journalism side of the business, and that's the next challenge. And we're all working as hard as we possibly can to find the answer to that.
The Australian newspaper has had its paywall up for a little while now. How are you going with that? Because you are now having to ask people to pay for something that they've been able to get for free online.
Sure, that's true, but a couple of fundamental things have happened, and the most fundamental thing that has happened is Apple technology, and the iPad and the iPhone has broken through the barrier that people won't pay for digital content. They will pay for digital content and are more than happy to do it. Our contention is that people understand the value of high quality information and will pay for it. We're absolutely convinced of that. The number of subscribers is growing all the time. We are in a very strong learning phase, and we are are wrestling with, as every media company, newspaper company is, what's the best pay model for, whether it's, as we say, a freemium model or a metered model that the New York Times has. That's where we're at now, is still exploring. But the take-up rate with the Australian, we're very happy with.
A crystal ball question. In 2 years' time, which is when you've said you want the restructuring done by, how much of your profits and revenue will still come from newspapers and how much from digital?
I think in 2 years' time you'd have to say that the majority of our revenue and profit would still be coming from printed newspapers, and we will do our level best to ensure that that remains as high as possible for as long as possible.
Why the urgency for this if you say that newspapers are still going to be a huge part of your business and they're still going to be very profitable?
Throughout human history, it's an absolute pattern that people overestimate the pace of change and underestimate the size of change. So eventually this digital revolution that we're going through is going to fundamentally change our world, but we have time to get it right. And what we have time to get right is to keep newspaper revenue for as strong as possible, for as long as possible, while we position ourselves for the eventual future. So there is massive urgency, and there's urgency, but there's still time to get it right. There's no time, though, to abandon the piece of the puzzle that's driving your business, and will drive it, I think, for longer than people are predicting it will.
But the need to go to digital is absolutely apparent?
Absolutely. There's no choice that the future of the global information economy is digital. But where we are, we have to remind ourselves we are right in the middle of this revolution. We're not arriving before it or after it. We are right here, right now in it. And what we need to create a digital future is the funding from our existing business for as long as possible.
So you think news is incredibly well placed in the middle of this maybe madness that nobody really knows quite where it's heading?
I think we are almost uniquely placed in that we, globally in newspapers, we are beautifully positioned because we publish in the English language. We have great trusted titles in the key markets of the world, and we have scale to make those as efficient as possible, and we also are incredibly excited about it. So yeah, we're in as good a place as a knowledge-based business could be.
Campbell Reid, thank you.
Thank you.
Next, the man who made the leap from newspapers into online business journalism and has just made a small fortune out of it.